This is a comparison I've really been looking forward to presenting because these are two of the hottest electric cars on sale in Australia right now. By this point, subscribers know all about the Hyundai Ioniq 5, but as of 3 days ago, the Tesla Model Y is now available for order in Australia, and we've got our hands on one of the very first, brand new, and I mean it, 22 Ks on the odometer when I collected the Model Y rear-wheel drive over my right shoulder. Now at $68,900, the Model Y rear-wheel drive is very close in price to the Hyundai Ioniq 5 rear-wheel drive, which is $71,900. Both of these cars have a near identical range, 451 Ks, 455 Ks, but only one of them can access Tesla's Supercharger network, at least until that gets opened up to all manufacturers, which hopefully will happen here in Australia. So will supercharging be the deciding factor in today's comparison? Well, the Tesla doesn't get away with it that easily. Today, we're going to look at the interiors of these two mid-size SUVs. We'll check out their back seats and their boots, plus the fruits, and then we'll take them for a drive, but not before we compare running costs, which can differ between these two electric cars. But before we make a start, hit subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let's get going. When it comes to design, both these vehicles might be 5-seat mid-size SUVs on paper, but they look very different. The Ioniq 5 is like an 80s vision of the future, and I love that about it. It's available in Australia only in high-spec form, but it's only a little bit more expensive than a base model Model Y, which is kind of interesting, but it means that it wears these big, good-looking snowflake 20-inch wheels as standard here in Australia. You get the two-tone body cladding, and this car, which is in kind of like a metallic amber gray, looks really cool. Of course, such a polarizing design will be a love it or hate it thing. You can let me know down below what you think, but I, for one, love it. Love these pixel headlights, the kind of moustache lighting here at the front, and the back is really just as dramatic. And of course, because it's a bit more square, it's that little bit more practical for carrying taller items in the boot as well, although we'll go there later. So how do the looks of the Hyundai compare to the Tesla? Well, where the Hyundai is square, the Tesla is round. Just like the Model 3 that the Y is based on, Tesla have gone for organic shapes with this car. And that means you're either really gonna like one or the other, I reckon. You either like organic or you like kind of 80s squared off futuristic. You can let me know down the bottom. I do think that in midnight silver though, the Model Y probably looks its best. This one, the base model rear drive, just has its standard 19-inch Gemini wheels. I don't mind the design, and a chunkier tyre certainly helps ride quality, but we'll get into a direct comparison of how comfortable these cars are later in the video. In this contest, I firmly believe the Hyundai Ioniq 5 has the better interior, and I'm going to tell you why. Of course, you can flame me in the comments before I do if you like, but there is an objective justification for it, and it starts up here for Australia with the fact that the Hyundai has a standard sunblind fitted. This country gets really hot, and increasingly around the world, many countries are also getting extremely hot in summer too, as a result of climate change. And that means that one thing that uses battery charge is cooling the cabin in the hotter months. Now, I'm wearing a jacket and a sweater today, so it's not hot in Australia right now, but usually it is. And just having this sunblind is a big help in terms of conserving efficiency, even though the Tesla is more efficient for other reasons. But that's not the only reason why I think the Hyundai has a superior interior. It also has higher spec in some areas, like seats with a greater range of electric adjustment, but also seat cooling, which is a good passive way of cooling the body, again without having to blast aircon at your face. And because this seat material, which is not leather, because this artificial material has perforations in it, it's better at wicking away sweat, whereas the flat vinyl in the Tesla ends up creating quite a sticky body, particularly if you have the dark interior. But as it happens, both of these vehicles are fitted with the light interior. However, both of their white seats are starting to show wear. The difference is this Ioniq 5 has 9,989 hard-driven press car kilometers on the clock, whereas the Model Y has 60 kilometers on the clock, and arguably its white seats are already showing more wear from my dark denim than this car has picked up in almost 10,000 Ks. That said, of course, you can get the leather or the seats treated by a detailer, and they'll be easier to take care of over time. The technology concept, though, is one area where the Hyundai trails the Tesla by some degree, and that's because this vehicle relies on its own OS or smartphone mirroring with a cable to feel kind of anywhere near up to date, whereas the Tesla has its own data connection and vastly more sophisticated software. So if you're a someone that really, really loves infotainment and tech, I think you're probably going to be more satisfied by the Tesla that we'll check out in a second. But we do have an instrument cluster here with our speed right in front of us, so that's easier to use in a country with a lot of speed cameras, plus dedicated blind spot cameras for both left and right displayed in front of you rather than over here as they are in the Tesla. There's also dedicated climate controls, which are a little bit easier to use, more hard buttons generally, so I guess you could say the Hyundai has a slightly more old school interior, but usability and practicality are quite good. We've got lots of space down here, flat floor, big cup holders, and a large bin between the seats with wireless charging for just one phone. Smaller door bins than the Tesla as well. Material quality though is good, and build quality across every Ioniq 5 we've tested, which is 5 or 6 cars now, has been uniformly excellent across all of them. The Bose stereo is also pretty good, though not quite a match for the excellent premium system in the Model Y. That being said, when you put it all together, it's a slightly more comfortable place, the Hyundai inside. It's got better seats for a hot country, and it's got a sun blind, and for me, those things add up to a more usable car long term. On a technology front, the Model Y does feel a generation newer than the Ioniq 5. That being said, it won't be to everybody's tastes that everything on the tech front in this car is virtually contained in this 15-inch touchscreen that sits to slate in the center. And that's because there's no instrument cluster at all. Higher end Teslas like the facelift Model S actually do have a cluster in front of you which presents your speed and other information. In the Model 3 and the Model Y, your speed sits just here. It's not quite in your peripheral vision though, so I find that you have to kind of turn your eyes or your head to look at your speed here, whereas in the Ioniq 5, like most cars, it's in your line of sight right in front of the driver. I'm sure you get used to it. It's kind of a taste thing. You can let me know what you think down below. That being said, the software is clearly superior on Tesla's operating system to the Hyundai. We've got Google Maps driven navigation, inbuilt Spotify, inbuilt YouTube, Netflix, what have you. There is a premium infotainment subscription of $120 a year that you do have to pay to get all of the best stuff and really harness the inbuilt data connection in this car, but I think that's a fair price for the level of connectivity that this vehicle offers, and I would be paying it personally. You do learn to drive all of the controls through this screen, though it's slightly annoying to change things like climate, which you sort of have to do, particularly on hotter days where the sun's beating through the glass roof and you really need to whack the air conditioning down in terms of temperature and the fan in terms of up. Some people love auto, that's fine. I tend to fiddle myself with the climate control. Now, we are sitting on quite different seats to the Hyundai here. Still white, that's an option on this vehicle, which has been ticked on this car. Brand new car, and I've got to say the seats are already marking, but I would definitely go for the white interior because it helps to keep the cabin cooler, which is very important, especially when you don't have a sun blind for the roof. So I'd just be keeping a rag in here. I'd be getting the seats treated by a professional detailer before I started driving the car, doing everything possible to make them easier to clean over time because they do mark quite badly. We also have this white trim here. Minimalist, certainly simple, the interior. A lot of people will like this design. I think it's okay. I do like the steering wheel though, very simple, just nice, well-weighted controls, lovely stalks here as well. The driving position's pretty good too, though visibility isn't quite as good out the back, and it isn't even that great to start with in the Ioniq 5, though we do have blind spot cameras as well in this car. Practicality is slightly better in the Tesla, even bigger bins between the seats here, decent cup holders, wireless charging for 2 phones, 4 USB-C ports, and big flockline door bins really complete the picture. 2 very different interior styles here. You can tell me what you like down below. In terms of backseat space, the Ioniq 5 is pretty good, but slightly worse than the Model Y with my driver's seat in the same position, but it is only slight. And as you can see, legroom is still really good. In terms of headroom, it's also pretty good, though not as high as the Model Y, where the ceiling really does go quite high in that car. There is a flat floor in the back, though this large center bin area does take up more space. So in terms of seating a 5th person, it's not as easy in the Hyundai. 2 USB ports back here, mat pockets on both of the front seats, and a flip down armrest here with 2 cup holders. Material quality is pretty good, and another inclusion that I like on this car is that it has sun blinds fitted to the back windows too. So keeping the sun off the faces of people back here is really easy, and that's beneath a tint on top of it. There are a few reasons why the Model Y has a better back seat than the Ioniq 5, but the first one is just how much space there is. As you can see, I've got heaps of legroom, even more than in the Hyundai, And because the center console is way less bulky in this car, you can easily get a fifth person in if you have to, and they have room for their legs. But there's still air vents here in the back, USB-C chargers, and like the Ioniq 5, heated rear seats. Though we do have double glazing on both the front and rear windows in the Tesla, though both cars are fairly quiet on the road, as we'll see shortly. But only this one has HEPA filtering for the cabin, which is kind of cool. But the seat base is also slightly better angled in the Tesla for supporting your legs over long journeys. So I think this is the car I'd prefer to be in, as long as the day wasn't too hot outside with that glass roof. Now we do have a flip down armrest here in the Model Y, but another nice feature is that it has 40-20-40 split folding rear seats. Always something I like to see. Also map pockets in both front seats, just like the Hyundai. So while it's a much of a muchness, you just get slightly more room here in the Tesla, and it's slightly more comfortable to boot. Next up, let's check out cargo room. Coming around the back of the car to look at cargo capacity, I just want to pause at the rear end design of the Ioniq. Love this pixel design here, looks so cool, and Australia only gets the high series tail lights, so the indicators are really nicely integrated here at the back end. Now we do have a power tailgate, you get a couple of beeps and it slowly gets out of your way, and it is finished actually in grey carpeting. Really nice attention to detail. We've got a heavier duty charging cable here in the back for some reason, but underneath the boot floor, you'll find a small amount of space, only a tyre mobility kit. Neither of these cars runs a spare wheel of any kind, unfortunately. 524 litres is Hyundai's claim. Now the window line is lower in this car, the floor is higher, so overall it is the smaller boot here in the Hyundai. We do have this cargo blind fitted as standard, however, plus a finisher here to help protect your paint. Then a control, oh, a couple of beeps, control to close the boot, but no specific control to lock the car here. The engrossed Model 3 aesthetic kind of continues here around the back of the Model Y, and that's certainly no criticism. It's just that the design theme is quite different from the squared off and detailed Hyundai. This one's more minimalist, and a lot of people will prefer that, of course. Like the Hyundai, we've got a standard power tailgate, no annoying beeps though. It just gets out of your way and fast and reveals what is undoubtedly the bigger boot of the pair. 854 litres is the claim. That seems high, but the window line is definitely higher. The boot floor is definitely lower, and then we have like this mega boot underneath the actual floor of the vehicle too, where you're going to be able to get a whole bunch of extra stuff in there. Still no spare tyre, but we do have a nice neat little Velcro bag for your granny charger, which is cool, and spaces off to the left and right, plus spring-loaded controls to lower down those front seats, which would lower down if the passenger seat wasn't all the way back. There we go, one of them worked perfectly fine. So in terms of cargo capacity, it's certainly looking like a win for the Tesla. Let's check out the frunks, where this car kind of seals the deal when it comes to practicality. Whether it's Tesla's mid-size platform or eGMP under that Ioniq 5, both of these cars have dedicated electric vehicle architecture, but only one of them has really taken it the full distance when it comes to packaging, and that's the Model Y. Because here in the rear-wheel drive version, it has a 117 litre frunk, which is really quite decent. It's lined in hard plastic, so it's a good area for putting dirty things, but it is sealed properly, so your stuff is going to stay clean. Now, that compares to a smaller frunk when it comes to the Ioniq 5, especially if you go for the dual motor version of the Hyundai. The one I've brought along here though, it's the rear-wheel drive. But as you can see underneath the bonnet of this vehicle, it's got a much smaller frunk. At 54 litres, it's less useful. It also goes without a full seal. It does have a seal of sorts, but not as good as the heavy duty rubber on the Tesla. Here we've got the charging cable for granny charging in the frunk. Certainly less well thought out, but definitely better than having nothing up here, of course. When it comes to running costs, the Model Y is in general about 20% cheaper to run than the Hyundai Ioniq 5, and that pretty much all comes down to its superior efficiency. It does more with less, and that's because it has a smaller battery and it uses less electricity as it goes. So in the Tesla Model Y, it has a 60 kilowatt hour usable, thereabouts, LFP battery, which can be charged to 100% time and time again without degrading the battery. It has efficiency of 13.2 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers WLTP, giving it a range of 455 kilometers. Now, that range is very similar to the Ioniq 5, which has a 451 kilometer WLTP range, but the Ioniq needs a 72.6 kilowatt hour usable lithium ion battery to get you the same distance as the Tesla. So it's a 20% bigger battery in terms of usable space. And mathematically, that means the consumption is also 20% higher. 16 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers is the claim. So you're using more electricity to go the same distance. And that means the charging costs are going to be about 20% higher. Now for a home charge, both of these vehicles is going to cost you $15 to $20 here in New South Wales at the time of recording. Using ChargeFox or EV, the sort of public DC charging networks, it's going to cost you around $40 to fill these cars. The Tesla exclusively can use its own brand's Superchargers here in Australia, which cost you a little bit less than ChargeFox and EV at the time of recording. In terms of warranty though, the Hyundai is slightly superior. It has a vehicle warranty of 5 years with unlimited kilometers and a high voltage warranty of 8 years and 160,000 kilometers. The Tesla, on the other hand, has the same high voltage warranty, but it only has a vehicle warranty of 4 years and 80,000 kilometers, so a little bit shorter, particularly on the distance front for high milers. And lastly, with servicing, there's a bit of a hangover of Hyundai's status as a legacy manufacturer because you have to get this vehicle serviced every 12 months or 15,000 kilometers at a cost of $220 for each of the first 5 services. The Tesla, on the other hand, has app-driven condition-based servicing where the app pings you if the vehicle needs maintenance. But there's a list of things that usually do have to be swapped every 2 or 3 years. Things like cabin filters, lubing the brake calipers, and also tire rotation and balancing. Tesla says every 10,000 kilometers is right for that. So effectively, the running costs do fall somewhat in the Tesla's favor. When it comes to driving the Model Y, you really do get a sort of quintessential electric car experience. It's smooth, it's quiet, and the tuning of Tesla's motors continues to be really good. And in fact, the single motor Model Y rear wheel drive is going to be enough for almost anybody. Much the same is true for the Ioniq 5, because they both have adequate performance, but without the drag that you get from a front motor. They use less electricity, and not many people are actually going to drive these vehicles on low traction surfaces. So the only real reason to buy the performance, in my view, is if you want to go very, very quickly in a straight line. And in actual fact, the rear-wheel drive version of both of these cars handle better because they're lighter, especially in the case of the Model Y, which is really light. Tesla claims around 1,900 kilos. We measured it at about 1,830, which is really impressive for an electric car with a decently sized battery and a range in excess of 400 kilometers. So well done, Tesla, on keeping it as light as possible. But some aspects of the Model Y are not entirely up to scratch, and that includes the ride quality, which is just way too terse. Tesla have had a similar problem with the Model X SUV, so it seems to be when raising the ride height above where the sedans sit, the Model 3 and the Model S, the ride quality tends to suffer, and that problem hasn't been entirely dealt with the Model Y. The overall damping is okay, and the body control is actually quite acceptable. It's the way the suspension deals with square edge bumps and just the constant kind of urban imperfections that you get everywhere in Australia. It's impossible not to notice the suspension in this car. It's not comfortable, and the Ioniq 5 and vehicles like the EV6 just tend to smooth out square edge bumps in a more adept way. They're a little bit softer, perhaps the body control isn't quite as good as the Tesla, but for most people going about their daily duties, those cars are just more comfortable. The Model Y is very sporty in the suspension setup. There's so much road feel that it probably doesn't need in entry-level rear-wheel drive form, and that's even on 19-inch wheels, so I definitely wouldn't go up to 20s or 21s, because if the ride is very average on 19s, it's not going to get any better with less sidewall, so that would be my recommendation. Partially, it feels the tires are really quite high pressure. Tesla says 42. The car was delivered with 44 PSI. I adjusted it down to 42 as per the placard. There's still really no give in the rubber. This is a brand new car. It may soften up kind of 10%, but it's not going to change massively. So I would strongly recommend test driving it to make sure that you can live with the ride first. And they are available for test drive in Australia now, so that should be fine. It's a shame about the ride because the rest of the experience is really lovely actually, including the steering. which is mid-weighted, it's quick and direct. It's a pleasure to steer this car, especially because it's light and has good body control. You know, the fact this car is like 200 kilos lighter than an Audi Q5 is amazing, and you can really feel that lightness in the chassis. So a supple suspension would just complete the package. Now in rear-wheel drive form, it doesn't feel lightning quick, and it doesn't quite feel that much off the line. It actually feels like the power is deliberately staggered by software off the line, so it doesn't launch you. Whereas when you get into the performance, it's like, whoa, okay, it's fast. I kind of wonder whether that's a strategic choice of Tesla, but certainly roll-on acceleration is so easy. 80 to 120 is really rapid in this car. It gets a move on. It just doesn't have that classic like head pressed against the headrest when you take off, which is sort of interesting. But there's enough power and torque, absolutely. It does feel quicker than the Ioniq 5. It is quicker on paper and in the real world than the Ioniq 5. Partially that's because it's a lot lighter. Partially it's because it has a lot more power. But either way, neither of these cars will disappoint when it comes to performance. It's just that the Model Y has a harder edge. A couple of other things though, this car doesn't have full self-drive option. Tesla doesn't put full self-drive on their corporate fleet, so we just have basic autopilot. The adaptive cruise control is tuned really nicely, and the lane keep assist is good too, but there are some annoyances. If you change lanes, the lane keep just turns off, whereas you don't have that issue in the Ioniq 5 as it turns it back on for you once you've changed lanes. Also, the blind spot camera is good in this car, great in the Hyundai because it has an instrument cluster. In this pairing, if it's the Model Y, which is a bit more fun to drive on a high-speed country road because of its really quite good body control and low-ish weight for a mid-size SUV in the luxury segment generally, but especially for an electric car, it's the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which is more suitable for day-to-day low-speed driving, and that's because its suspension just has more compliance. This car isn't as quick as the Model Y, either from a standing start or in the mid-range, and it doesn't hold itself together quite as well if you're cornering closer to 10 tenths, but hitting bumps in urban spaces, you're going to be more comfortable in the Ioniq 5. So I guess it depends what kind of driving you're really going to be doing. If you're going to get out of town every weekend, you really like driving, you're probably going to get quite a lot out of the Tesla Model Y rear-wheel drive. Whereas in the Ioniq 5, if you spend every day in traffic, you've got a lot of bumps in the suburb that you live in, this is probably going to be the car which is going to make you more satisfied as the months and the years start to roll by. Now, the basic mechanical package is remarkably similar in these two cars. They both have a single motor on the rear axle and a single speed transmission, and as it goes in the Ioniq 5. The main differences are really in the aggression here. So this car has 160 kilowatts of power, and that's about how it feels. It's warm-ish, but no firecracker. You can go for a dual motor all-wheel drive version of the Ioniq 5, which has 225 kilowatts, and everybody knows there'll be an Ioniq 5N later on. But in this comparison between two rear drive cars, the Tesla does feel higher performance, though neither of them are outright fast. There really is a difference here between the hard-edge Tesla and the softer, more cushy, more compliant, but ultimately less controlled Ioniq 5. So it's kind of a choice of what you're personally looking for, and you can let me know your priorities down below. I don't think the steering is quite as nice in the Ioniq 5. It's certainly not bad. It's just not as sort of connected to the front wheels, nor is there as much grip in this car as on the hand cooks that the Model Y scores, but also those hand cooks are containing less weight in the Tesla, which does make a huge difference to grip levels at the end of the day. In terms of noise, vibration and harshness, these are both quiet cars, but there's better noise insulation of the suspension in the Hyundai. So I think it's probably slightly quieter, but not as quick, not as frenetic, and ultimately not quite as grippy on those country road kind of drives that you may or may not partake in. When it comes to safety, this vehicle has adaptive cruise control, the tuning of which is fairly good, but it has very good lane keep assist. It really does hold you in the center of the lane, and if you change lanes in this car, it kicks back in automatically in the next lane, whereas in the Tesla, you're always having to manually reset it unless you have the full self-drive option on that car. I also really like the integration of the blind spot cameras that Hyundai are doing at the moment, where you've got dedicated spaces for the left and the right camera in your instrument binnacle. Of course, you don't have that binnacle or cluster in the Tesla. So it's really a difference in style, in tuning, in priorities here. If you want something a little more laid back, a little more comfortable, the Hyundai makes sense. Something a bit sportier and a lot firmer and a bit more techy, the Model Y is probably a good fit. Like so many things, this comparison really comes down to what your priorities are for your next car. If what you're looking for is absolutely effortless charging, then you want to go for the Tesla Model Y because it's the only brand that has access to Tesla's Superchargers, which are definitely the best charging network in Australia. They're the most reliable, they're the most plentiful, they just work. And that means that buying an electric car doesn't have to be a stressful experience when it comes to public charging. Equally, on the technology front, its infotainment is really easy to use. The ubiquity of these things is also keeping depreciation relatively low. However, if on the other hand, what you want is a car that rides properly, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 is the way to go. Neither of these cars are that easy to get into at the moment. The waitlist for the Model Y now stretches into mid-2023, whereas the waitlist for the Ioniq 5 is unclear, but it's not that difficult to get into one within sort of 6 months if you sign up. Simply put, the Ioniq 5 is more comfortable in every situation. Its seats are also a little bit more supportive too, and it has features like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto if you want to use conventional smartphone mirroring. Now, for myself, as someone living in the inner city without easy access to home charging, my apartment just doesn't have power points in the basement whatsoever, the Tesla Model Y would be my pick because I know I can rock up to a Tesla charger wherever I am and get a really easy charge. However, if I was somebody doing a lot of country miles where ride quality became that much more important, the Ioniq 5 I think would be the way to go. So it's difficult to come to a final verdict, though I think its price advantage and its lower running costs and its charging accessibility means that in this contest, in a very close win, the Tesla Model Y carries the day. But I'm very keen to know your opinion because it is so close. So let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit the subscription button, hit the notification bell, and as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.